Okay, so when you're playing lead guitar, when you're soloing, can you mix together different scales or different types of scales? Now, most people who have played any kind of lead guitar or who have started learning lead guitar, they've heard of scales and they've heard of potentially the pentatonic scale, maybe the major scale, the minor scale. Those are the three most popular ones. And then we also have other scales like the Dorian scale or different types of modes that some people might have heard of, etc. Now, it's really not important what you've heard of or what you haven't heard of. The point is, we have different types of scales, right? And the question is, can we mix those together when we're playing? And the answer is, of course, absolutely. That's what I was about to say most great guitar players do mix scales. I would say a lot of them do that. A lot of them don't do that. Honestly, a lot of them, especially rock and roll players, kind of rely on the pentatonic scale, especially if you're playing blues or something like me, within the pentatonic realm, so they can get that blues type sound. But when it comes to mixing different scales together, let's make sure we're not making an assumption. I think this question is actually coming from someone who's actually focusing on the actual patterns that they're playing as they're playing the guitar. And I want to make a distinction. We do want to focus on the patterns at first, but the only reason we want to focus on the patterns is just to be able to play the right notes without having to think about the names of the notes. That's it. We just want to learn the patterns just so we can hit the right notes, right? And once we learn the patterns and we start getting comfortable with the patterns, then of course the goal is, let's say you learn a pattern and you learn how to connect the fretboard with different patterns. So let's say you have pattern number 1 here, doesn't matter what the scale is. Let's say you have pattern number 2 here, and then you have pattern number 3 here. Let's say you have these 3 different patterns, and your goal at first is to learn how to, quote, connect this much of the fretboard by playing all the right notes, by connecting these 3 different patterns together. Now, at first, that's the easiest place to start. Why? Because it's really simple to learn an easy finger pattern, and then learn a second easy finger pattern, and then learn a third easy finger pattern. But where most people get stuck is they actually focus, they keep focusing their attention on the actual patterns themselves, when after they have not mastered the patterns, but after they've just learned where the notes are, then they should shift their attention, they should shift their focus away to the actual music that they're playing. The patterns are just a vehicle to allow us to hit the right notes. Whenever you can hit the right notes, that's the first hurdle to get over, because now you're no longer thinking about where are the right notes. Now that's the time to start focusing on the music that you're playing, the music that you're hearing when you play your guitar, and the music that, let's say you're playing with a background track, a backing track, or you're playing with maybe another person. Either way, there's going to be music in the background. Your attention needs to be available to listen to that background music. And the only way you can do that is by first just learning the patterns, just so you don't have to think about where the right notes are. So after you learn the patterns, you then shift to thinking about the actual music. And then once we have defined, let's say, this amount of the fretboard, where let's say we learned pattern 1, whatever pattern scale that is, we learn pattern 2, whatever scale that is, we learn pattern 3, and we're connecting these 3 things together. Well, guess what? After we learn these 3 patterns, well, now the goal is to erase the lines in between the patterns. The most people get stuck in patterns and boxes. That's because they never take their attention off the pattern or the box, and they never focus on the music that they're making. They never let their ear guide their fingers, right? And there are specific ways to do that. I don't, you literally just pick up your guitar and you're supposed to just know how to do it. That's true, right? There are specific ways to do that. There's specific ways to train on that. But the whole point is, once you learn these 3, let's say, patterns, the goal after that is to erase the lines in between the patterns. That's what we call stitching the patterns together. By the time you stitch all the patterns together, you have one seamless fretboard, literally. And that's the point. So again, let's say you've learned some patterns, and let's say you've learned some patterns with different scales, or what most people call different scale patterns. Now, this is a different topic, but the term scale patterns or scale pattern is misleading, because a scale is not a pattern. Or in other words, if I'm learning a particular pattern on the fretboard, that pattern itself is not a scale. I'm playing a scale with the pattern, but a scale is just a series of notes. I can play the same series of notes. Let's say I play the notes A, B, C. Let's say that's a scale, the ABC scale. Well, I can play the notes A, B, C in a million different places on the fretboard. I would be curious to know what the real number is, but a lot of different places on the fretboard. In different combinations. So maybe I can play it here. I can play the ABC scale here, or here, or here, or here. It doesn't matter where I go. So it's a little misleading when we say that a pattern itself is a scale, Remember, the pattern is just a vehicle to get you to hit the right notes within the scale without having to think about the names of the notes. So back to the question about when I'm playing lead guitar, can I blend in different types of scales? Meaning, can I mix pentatonic scale with, let's say, the major scale or the minor scale? And of course, again, the answer is absolutely. So why would you want to do that? Well, if we think about what a scale is, like I said a minute ago, a scale is a series of notes. That's great. That's the boring answer, right? Nobody wants to hear that a scale is a series of notes because it doesn't do anything for us. We're trying to play music. Music is just an expression of an emotion, right? It's an oral emotion, emotional expression. And if we were going to play different types of scales, the reason we would do that is to express different feelings, to express different themes. For example, if I wanted to pick up the guitar and play something like that sounded like blues, well, I'm going to play the pentatonic scale. Why? Because the pentatonic scale sounds like blues, right? It's not that the pentatonic scale sounds like blues. It just so happens that blues uses the pentatonic scale, so everybody associates the pentatonic scale with blues, right? Doesn't mean you always have to play the pentatonic scale, but it gives you that blues feeling, it gives you that blues sound. Whereas on the other hand, something like a major scale in general, it's really hard to make one statement about what a major scale sounds like, but it's generally going to sound, again, happier. Maybe some people might think it sounds a little bit like classical music, or it can sound like classical music, or maybe more complex music with like different chords that's maybe not necessarily a pop song, or it could also be pop songs as well, like happy, upbeat type sounding pop songs. Now, on the other hand, we have, let's say, the minor scale. If you were going to play a minor scale, well, that might mean because you want to express some kind of a sad or some kind of dark or some kind of angry emotion. And again, that's the reason why you would play those different scales. Now, the only thing that you can't do is mix anything that's major and minor at the same time. You can't play in a major key and a minor key at the same time. That's the only thing you can't do. So basically, you can't be happy and sad at the same time. You got to pick one, right? But yes, you can absolutely, and you should absolutely focus on or practice experimenting with mixing different types of scales. They all have to be in the same key, but experiment with mixing different types of scales, aka mixing different types of sound themes together when you play. When you do that, the musical landscapes that you will be able to paint will be a lot more bright, a lot more vivid, a lot more colorful, with a lot more depth. And that's the stuff that keeps people wanting to listen.